Could I just ask, as everybody's joining, I will go through protocol in a minute, but when we're not speaking, if you could all mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise, that would be great. Thank you. Neil, Purnima, do you think we should start?
Yes, Jane, we are now quorate.
Lovely, thanks Neil for checking that.
I think we've got 11 members at the minute.
Great.
Neil, do you just need a couple of minutes to do just to take everyone's names, or have you managed to do that?
I can sort that out.
Okay. All right. Yes, Jane, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining what is our first virtual schools forum meeting. I did want to just go through protocol really because we are obviously doing this for the first time. So I've got a script to go through, so just bear with me as I kind of go through it. So as we're using Microsoft Teams, and there are several of us in attendance, there are, as I say, a couple of housekeeping items that I just want to begin with. So I will be chairing the meeting, and I'm assisted by Neil and Purnima. We have additional support from Helen Barnsley and Jane Gillan from Democratic Services from Warwickshire County Council, just to ensure the meeting progresses as smoothly as possible. The agenda and papers have been published and are available online, and you should have all received electronic copies of those. This meeting is a formal meeting and is actually being streamed live to the public, as they normally would have the right to attend. It is also being recorded to help with minute taking as well. Unfortunately, not everyone can be seen on the screen at any one time, so it's more difficult to manage that. It is important, therefore, that we follow some basic rules to ensure clarity for those listening. So, as I've just said, for those who were with me right at the start, if you could mute your microphones when not speaking, just so that we're not distracted by any background noise. But please do remember to unmute yourself in order to speak when asked to do so. Also, if you turn off your camera when not speaking, this will help with overall bandwidth. For those who are familiar with Teams, sometimes it can be a bit glitchy and it can be cured by turning off your camera. As we have a number of participants in this meeting, I'd ask that you please indicate in the chat function that you wish to speak, and we can then ensure we deal with all speakers in an organised manner. If you hover your mouse over the screen, your control bar will appear. You'll see on the control bar a speech bubble. If you click on that, it will bring up a window to the right of your screen, and you can type a message in there indicating that you have a question or wish to speak. Now, I'm aware, and I'm sure quite a few of you are aware through Teams, you do have your raise your hand function. This function isn't available to all participants, particularly those using tablets, hence why we're using the chat function and not the hand function. For the purposes of the minutes and to ensure clarity, it would assist me and those watching if participants could wait until introduced by me before speaking and state their name in advance of their comment or question. Please do try not to speak over each other. I know I'm terrible at that, so we all have to take a step back and just allow others to speak. And if you experience difficulties at any time or require something to be repeated, please do indicate this within the chat function and it will be addressed. As this is a new way of working for some of us, and because it is a large group of people that's on this meeting call, I hope that you will bear with us because we may have to pause at a point if it's not quite working. So just bear with us, but hopefully the technology will work. Okay, so recording has started, as I say, and it is being live streamed. So just please do bear that in mind, everybody. And then I think we should be able to start with the agenda. Neil, are we proposing to share documents on the meeting, or are we just assuming people will have access?
I've assumed that people would have had access to them, so they were sent out in the normal way. So, I mean, because there wasn't a huge amount of documents really compared to previous schools forum.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that. Oh yes, before we do that, before we get started on the agenda, I would like to introduce two people from Warwickshire County Council who've not attended the meeting before and are new to the local authority. So that's Andy and Dwayne. I wonder, Andy, could you introduce yourself first, please?
Remember to unmute before I start talking and you can't hear me. I've done that too many times this week. Hi, Andy Felton. I'm the new Permanent Assistant Director of Finance for Warwickshire. And I appreciate you've had a little bit of sketchy attendance from previous ADs with us having a lot of contractors in recently. So I'm quite keen to make it a regular appearance at these meetings if I can, just to sort of rebuild that relationship. And I know my finance team have been supporting and representing, but it just probably helps with the linkage into the senior levels at Warwickshire alongside Ian and supporting Ian as well. So it's good to meet you all. I know I've had a bit of an email conversation after the last deferred meeting anyway, but it's nice to actually see some people for a change.
Thank you, Andy. That's great. Welcome on board. And Dwayne, could you introduce yourself as well?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dwayne Chattel. I'm the Head of Service Strategy and Commissioning Manager for Send and Inclusion. So hello, everyone.
Okay, and we'll be hearing from you later. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, so agenda items, minutes of the last meeting. I'll go through for accuracy first. Actually, I think it might be better, instead of people mentioning about accuracy of minutes, if you have concerns or issues around the minutes, could you maybe just put a comment in the chat and then Neil can pick those up?
Yeah, I can. I've already had comments from Martin, so thank you, Martin, for those.
Okay. So the best way to do it, I'll go through pages one by one, and if you've got any comments, just type away in the chat function. Okay, so page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 10. So if you're all happy with the accuracy of the minutes, could you just type in the chat function, just say yes, and your comments will come up with your name. That would be great. Thank you very much. Then what we'll do is go through matters arising from those minutes, and then we do have a matters arising paper as well. So going back, just bear with me as I scroll back. So the first matter arising is on page 4, and the discussion around early years. And the 5%, Neil Butler to take 5% centrally retained funding back to the early years working group. I know, Neil, you've got an update on that?
Yes. The issue was it was raised by Cetera that why didn't we passport the whole of the extra 8p to early years providers? We do have the option to top slice 5% of this to hold it centrally, which we did do. The services, the same as the providers, have been cash limited for a number of years. So we did make a decision that we would actually allocate the money to central services. By the time we got to the question at Schools Forum, budgets had been set, so it was very difficult to stop that allocation going out to service managers, because they would have already been making plans to spend the additional money that came from the additional funding from central government for the early years, 3 and 4 year old hours. Is that okay? Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Neil. There always might be a bit of a delay with regards to questions, but that seems fine, so thank you. The next matters arising is on page 8. Oh, Alison Bardsley, matters arising, page 3, legal position of admission service 1819. Yeah, thanks, Alison. That point still needs to be taken forward, because I think that point is still outstanding. I think you recall that one. So schools were reimbursed for the admissions service for 1920, but there still is that question around 1819 and the legal position on that. Neil, you're on mute.
And Sarah's asked a question about, can this be changed going forward? I assume this is passporting more of the AP, and we will be looking at it at the next early years working group, but that won't be till next term.
I think there was an early years working group organised, wasn't there? But has that been postponed? So that
there was one yesterday, but we postponed it.
Okay. Okay, so if that can be carried forward, that would be great.
Yes.
Okay.
Jane, it's Alison. Has there been any update on the admissions thing? Because that has been carried forward for, I can't remember how many months.
Yeah, good question. Neil, is that something, or Pranima, is that something that can be taken back? Because we did have the admissions working party, which we reported back to Schools Forum a while ago, and we did talk about the reimbursement for the admission service for 1920, but because the rules changed in 1819, we did raise the question at the admissions working group as to why that rebate wasn't given to schools for 1819 as well.
Yeah, I understand that's still an outstanding issue, and I will need to pick it up with the service, Jane.
If you could, that would be great. Can we just make that a very clear matters arising, and can we try and get that resolved by October for the next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, the schools, so the next matters arising, page 8, on the national funding formula. We did end up obviously with quite a large unallocated schools funding amount, and Neil, you were going to report back to Schools Forum in the meeting that was actually subsequently cancelled, which was the March meeting, outlining the consultation process with schools to distribute any unallocated schools funding. Are you covering that off in the matters arising paper, Neil, or do you want to cover it off now? You're on mute again, Neil.
I'm on mute again. Yes, I can cover it off now. Within the national funding formula, the only area that we haven't allocated money is to sparsity, and that was raised back in January. So this is money that goes to our smallest rural schools. There are 14 that fall into this category, and to allocate funding to them would cost about £260,000. As you know, we have a surplus in the schools block of 1.8 million because of the additional money we had in the growth fund, which wasn't allocated. So this money is ring fenced for schools. The issue is for us is whether we will actually fund the sparsity factor in this year. I know at the January meeting, Schools Forum supported that in principle. So it's the issue now is whether we can actually allocate that money. We are in conversation still with the ESFA over the issue, but they've gone a little bit quiet on it, so I need to give them a bit of a nudge.
So do you need Schools Forum to make a decision on that allocation out of growth fund into sparsity funding?
I think at this stage, Schools Forum supported us sending a letter to the SFA, which happened, and that was the question we asked. So my assumption would be because the majority supported the letter going to the SFA, the majority would have supported the funding going to sparsity. We could reaffirm that today if you wish, Jane.
Actually, specifically, didn't we need clearance from the SFA to administer it?
Sorry, Ian, could you rephrase that? I wasn't quite sure.
Well, we were all supportive of the sparsity allocation being made.
Yes. But
ESFA were not so supportive on the earlier correspondence.
No, not on the earlier correspondence, but we asked them another question, and we're still waiting for an answer on that, because technically they didn't sign off our national funding formula.
Yeah.
So it's still outstanding, so there was still an opportunity for us to change it, even at this late stage.
So we need to chase that down with the SFA.
We are still trying to chase it down, yes.
Yeah.
But I think Schools Forum did agree to the allocation to sparsity, so I don't think we need another vote on that, do we?
Okay.
No.
Sorry, Jane, I was just going to add to that, just to say, because I nudged Neil a little while ago about this. One of my hats is also a governor of the small school as well as my own school, and I know through working with those small schools, it's absolutely essential for their budgets to get this kind of sorted ASAP, really, because this is going to cause some really I mean, obviously all of us have got issues with finances, but I see in very real terms the impact this is going to have on those small schools, so it is quite an urgent issue.
Yeah, and I think when it was discussed at Schools Forum back in January, we were all very supportive of supporting those rural schools. So I definitely think it's the right decision. So I guess an action point is for Warwickshire, for yourselves to carry on working with the ESFA to get that ratified so that we can actually do it. Andy, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, probably more from my understanding. Do we have any routes to apply pressure to get an answer on that, Ian? Is that my side or your side that needs to follow that up?
No, we've been quite bullish in the correspondence with the SFA. We probably need to go higher up in their hierarchy to get them to overrule.
Okay. Is that something you want me to do, or are you happy to follow that through?
We'll follow it through. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So also on page 8, Ian, you were to set up a deficit recovery plan working group, which has happened. There are a number of us involved in that working group, and we will talk about that on item 5. Don't think there's anything else to add on that. And I think that's all the matters arising, certainly from the minutes. Then I think, Neil, can I hand you over to go through the matters arising paper, which is item 3?
Yes. Before I do that, Jane, can I just wind back a bit and do the apologies?
Oh, yes, I forgot about those. Terribly sorry.
Right, so we don't want to put these people on the name and shame list.
Yes,
so
sorry.
Apologies from James Hyam, Clive Sentence and Christine Marshall, and Nick Wiley has informed me that he will need to leave the meeting by 3:30. I'll now pick up the remaining matters arising. So we've discussed the sparsity factor. The other matters arising was on the DSG budget proposal, which was agreed by 11 members and one abstention. And the other issue on is the Schools Forum elections, which we discussed yesterday, that we do need to move forward on this quite quickly now. So the issue is the proposal is, I know this hasn't been put in a paper, but we discussed it yesterday, was that we would look for nominations by the end of the summer term. with going out to elections if necessary the first few weeks in September in order to have the new schools forum in place for the 1st of October meeting. So that's the proposal to schools forum. The decision for schools forum, and this is a decision by all members that they're happy with that proposal. And then the second proposal is that for academies, whether they're happy for the local authority to run the elections on their behalf.
So on the first proposal, I mean, the idea is to get the nominations out by the end of the summer term to basically expedite the process and not leave it until September, when I'm sure everybody will be extremely busy.
Yes.
And then the first schools forum meeting is in October, so there's not really much time to get that process done and dusted in a month. So that's why the suggestion is to get nominations in by the end of the summer term, and then that process at least can then start, and then it can be followed throughout September, so we have the members appointed in time for the October meeting. So I think that's a good proposal. I am happy with that. Can you all indicate if you're happy or not with that, or whether if you have any questions? Rebecca, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. It's only because I can't get on the chat, so yes, I'm happy. If you're expecting everyone to type, I can't type. You've now got the volume, but I can't type this time.
Okay, so Rebecca, that's fine. If you just put your hand up if you want to comment or if you want to vote, I can pick that up because I can see it on my screen and I can see that everybody's coming through with their agreement on that. Please let us know also if you're not happy. So, Marianne, are you also happy, or is that a question?
No, I'm happy. That's fine.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Sybil?
I also have difficulties with chat on my iPad function. So it's yes.
It's a yes from you.
Thank
Martin?
you.
Yes, but don't underestimate the difficulties in actually running and sorting out nominations and people meeting with, for example, school governing boards not meeting or being in virtual meetings and so on. And the whole communication process is clearly, in current circumstances, less smooth than normal. I think the principle's fine. The practice might turn out to be quite difficult, but we'll find out.
Yeah, no. Point taken, but I guess we're going to have to work with what we've got. But thank you for those. Okay, and the second proposal is for directed to academy representatives as to whether you are happy for Warwickshire to continue to coordinate the nomination process for academies. I, for one, can't think of any other alternatives, so I'm more than happy. So I would say yes. But can the academy representatives let us know what you're thinking about that as well? Okay, so we've got responses from Amy and Alison. I'm not sure, have we got any other, and myself, obviously. Don't know who else would be academy representatives.
Steve Jeffries.
Yeah.
Chris Atkins, Phil Johnson, Martin Davis, Nick Wiley.
Okay. Some of those are absent though, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's fine.
I think we've got a majority of saying yes. Yes, we have now.
Chris has come back as well, that's fine.
Yes.
Lovely. I think that's everything on the Matters Arisings paper. So the next one that we are going to go to is the DSG outturn report. And Pranima, I think I was going to hand that one over to you, if that's all right.
Yes, that's me. Good afternoon, everybody. So the DSG outturn position, it's an annual report that we bring to Schools Forum every year, just to report on the previous year's financial outturn position. Probably worth noting that although at the moment this is considered the final outturn position, it's yet to be audited by our external auditors. So if I just take you to the first table. The first table should be familiar to you, so that's table 1. It gives an overview of the DSG allocation both in gross and net terms, so gross before the academy recoupment and net after the academy recoupment. So the net DSG across all the total blocks was 223 million. In terms of the position at outturn, table 2 provides that information for you, but in summary terms, there has been an overspend of just over 5 million. We were forecasting an overspend of 5.3 million in the last forecast report. Worth noting that for the year 2019-20, that has been offset by the council budget resolution to contribute council funds of just over 2 million. So the final position is an overall overspend of 2.960 million. The detail of table 2 demonstrates that the majority of the overspend is in the high needs block, which we have been forecasting for the majority of the year. And actually, unless there's any specific questions, of course, which I'm very happy to take, the main part of today's agenda is obviously on the high needs, so there'll be opportunity to discuss that further later. As we've also mentioned several times in Schools Forum, we were expecting that we would exceed the 1% threshold set by the DFE, which indeed we did at year end. And interestingly, although we have been working towards the 1920 guidelines on what a local authority needs to do if they exceed the 1% threshold, it does appear that the DFE have somewhat changed the guidelines, but they haven't been as prescriptive, so we're not entirely sure at the moment what is expected of us. We do know that at some point the DFE will contact all local authorities that have exceeded the threshold and ask for information, but we're not entirely sure what that is as yet. So on that basis, we have continued to work towards their previous timetable. We've continued to create a recovery plan in the way that they have in previous years, as we considered that that would be good practice, and that makes up the majority of the rest of the meeting. Section 3 then provides explanations for the variances, and it might just be worth mentioning that we have colleagues from my team here to answer any further questions should people have any detail that they want exploring. But at a high level, on the schools block, there's 192,000 underspend. On the high needs block, there's a 5.240 million overspend. That's after the 2.1 contribution from the council, and as expected, that is made up of overspends in the SEN top-ups in the majority of places. I'll go into a little bit more detail on the early years block because we were forecasting right up until January a small overspend, and yet actually we've ended up with a quite a significant underspend on the early years block. Actually, just to explain as best I can, but Neil, feel free to clarify anything that I'm saying here. Essentially, the early years block is made up of information that we receive or anticipate relating to census. So we have to make a best estimate of what the next census data will tell us. And actually, because of birth rates, we had assumed that actually the adjustment to be made would be a reduction, so a clawback in the early years. But actually, despite birth rates going down, it does appear that, and I suspect it's from housing movements, that actually the number of pupils has gone up. So it didn't respond in the way we anticipated, but it's good news in that actually we received more funding rather than having a clawback of funding. So that was the adjustment that we had to make at year end. So that explains the overall underspend position. It will of course be ring fenced to the early years block. And actually what it potentially does do is help us to sustain the increase in early years universal rate that was unanimously agreed at Schools Forum earlier in the year. What we're less sure about is whether we're likely to continue to see swings each year. So what that does in terms of the variance. So what that does give us is something of a buffer. So in the worst case scenario, if at the end of this financial year there is a clawback, if we retain some funding in the reserve, we do have something of a buffer to smooth over any future variances, because as you can imagine, trying to predict census data is not the easiest job in the world. Moving on to the school central services block, that ended with a underspend of 240,000, which actually sets us up relatively well for the fact that in this financial year, the central school services block had a reduction of approximately that amount to deal with. So actually, in the hope that some of those underspends are recurrent, we're hopeful that we won't see an overspend in this year's reduced budget allocation for that block. And then Section 4 of the report just provides at a high level the individual reserves or the elements of the reserves made up by each block that are being carried forward into this new financial year. I'm very happy, obviously, to pause there and to take any questions.
I think, thanks, Pranima. I think, Andy, you were just wanting to make a point about the fact that Warwickshire County Council, that the DFE won't approve Warwickshire County Council funding any future deficits unless we seek specific approval. Could you maybe
so some of the changes in the legislation have now tightened up what we can and can't do to support the DSG. So legally we cannot put any money into the DSG from Warwickshire County Council's own resources now, unless we get specific dispensation from the Secretary of State to do so. I'm raising that now because it becomes particularly pertinent when we get onto the DSG overspend situation and how we start to recover that. Part of the solution might be, that said, Warwickshire County Council has, because of issues around our external audit and how we show our balance sheet, put a fund aside for covering the DSG for a period of time. We just can't access it. It's there for accounting purposes at the moment without that approval, basically. And we need something that's more sustainable moving forward, as you'll see later when we get into that conversation.
Okay, yeah, no, it's worth noting that. So that is an option to seek that approval as and when, if we decide we need to. Sarah, you had a question around the early years. I think it's underspend. Sarah Bromley.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you. I would like to. I'll put myself. Sorry, you can see me now. Yeah, I would just like to ask whether it would be possible to use the early years underspend in this current situation. The PVI sector is really struggling at the moment due to the virus, and it had been put aside for when we need it, but from what I understand, it's quite a lot more than what we were originally anticipating. And now would be a really timely point to support PVI settings. Many of us are under considerable pressure, and there will be many settings now facing the prospect of having to do staff layoffs and closure. I understand that schools have been given from central government money to support them during this period of added pressure. And I was wondering if it would be possible to explore the opportunity of using the money to do something similar for earlier settings as well.
So Neil, you may want to come in, but I think this is the perfect thing for the early years working group to look into. Sarah, you're on that group, aren't you?
I'm not, but Marianne is. Who's
I see. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I certainly think this is definitely is something for the group to look at in detail and come back to Schools Forum on. Neil, do you want to follow up on that?
I would like to say something actually, because we do have an issue at the moment whereby Sarah's quite right. I mean, schools have been given the opportunity to bid for additional money for COVID-19. One group of schools that have been excluded from that, has it changed, Ian?
No, an allocation has been made to schools for COVID recovery.
Not maintain nursery schools.
Okay, yeah.
So the issue we've got is our 6 maintained nursery schools are not eligible for that funding. So I just need to think very carefully. I absolutely agree with Sarah that if we have got an underspend, it's best to use it as quickly as possible, get it into the service as quickly as possible. The issue I've got is trying to treat a whole of the sector fairly, and what we can do with the maintained nursery schools as well as the PVI sector, and to make it fair. So it is something that I will look to move ahead fairly quickly on then once we get a fair idea of what we think the underspend is.
Yeah, any sustainability issues we can look at in terms of the early years group.
Yeah.
The issue of fairness and equity across different sectors is really an interesting one in this circumstance. Specific funding allocations were made for schools. Once again, maintained nursery schools were not included in that grant allocation. There's a quid pro quo as well. Government made an announcement around what its offer was for support for the early years sector, and particularly PVI schools, PVI settings. They had access to furloughing and such measures which schools do not have. So maintained nursery schools are actually in a double whammy situation where they can't furlough and they don't have access to the additional grant funding that was issued at national level. So as well as looking at sustainability in that local early years group, one of the things we can continue to do, as we have been doing on a weekly basis, is pointing out the issues in resourcing and sustainability in the PVI sector to the DFE as part of the COVID recovery conversations. That's additional.
Can I just also comment before Andy's got a comment and Alison's got a comment? You talk about grant funding for COVID-19. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. Certainly for academies, we can apply to the DFE for expenditure, additional expenditure incurred, only if you're in a deficit position though, and only up to a certain amount. So let's just be clear, there's not a huge amount of funding out there to cover schools.
Chair, if I may, I am covering COVID recovery when I get to that agenda item.
Marvellous. Okay, but I just wanted to clarify, because there isn't this golden pot of money available to schools to apply. So I don't know, Alison, if that's the point you were going to make. Perhaps you want to come in on that?
I suspect almost exactly. The COVID-19 relief mentioned, I'm not aware of what that is in any way, shape or form. And the early years funding, as I understand it, is exactly the same, whether you're a nursery school, maintained school, an academy school, a PVI, setting a child, whatever. And we're all, grateful that that has continued, even though the children are not necessarily present at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Amy, do you want to come in, and then Andy? Or Amy, I think you were just saying there's an issue with, just to point, well, Amy, do you want to say your point?
I can do, but I think you're about to say, it was just in addition to that, but I think if Ian's going to cover it later, that's fine.
Okay. Andy, did you want to say something?
It was just understanding the furlough comment, because we have agreed a process where schools, if they can demonstrate it's not grant funded, can furlough staff. So if there's a proportion of staff costs within a PVI setting, even if it's a maintained one, a maintained nursery setting that isn't covered by the grant, then there is still the opportunity to furlough staff. Or are we saying that those staff are still working? So
now we are covering a later item.
Right, okay. I'm getting ahead of ourselves, sorry.
The furloughing clearance was in relation to where there is traded income, not around core funding and activity in maintained schools.
But this, within a maintained nursery, then there is trading activity, isn't there? Because in the parental contributions that we've lost as a consequence.
Yeah, it would be relevant in terms of wraparound care.
Okay. I thought there was an opportunity with the part funding by the parents, but yeah, okay. I'll wait until the later item.
Yes, so if you cover that off, because we may have some further questions on your update, Ian, on that, because that's fine. Thank you. Okay, have we got any other questions on the report, Pranima's report? Oh, Sarah, you've got a question, just when the next early years working group will meet next. Neil, I think you said October, is that right?
Sorry, unmuted. I did say October, but bear in mind what's just been discussed now. I would look to do it as soon as possible. Two of the members on the working group are at schools forums. Hopefully they will appreciate the urgency of this.
Thank you. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. It needs to be quite timely. So yeah, that could happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions for Pranima or her team? Okay. I think that's that one done.
Thanks, Jane.
That's great. Thank you very much for the comprehensive review. It's a good update. Thank you. So we are now moving on to, I guess, the bigger element, which is the DSG recovery plan. So that's item 5. There is a paper that's been done, and then there's also the Appendix B, which is the actual recovery plan itself. If we can hand over to Dwayne, please, to take us through it.
Okay, hi everybody, thank you. Yes, so going back on what Pamina said, in terms of the budget this year, what we have seen is an overspend in the high needs block, and a sort of overspend of 7.3 million, with a contribution of 2.1 million from the council. What we are left with is a 5.2 million actual overspend. The requirement for the DFE when we're 1% over the budget is to produce a DSG recovery plan. In my previous job, I've been doing this for many, many years. And obviously, you know, it's something that I've been working on since I've arrived. So what we have done is pull together the DFE recovery plan in line in what has been happening and the activity that's been happening with inside Warwickshire on changes. What we do know, a lot of factors is the growth of the service has grown by 16% this year. Against our national sort of statistical neighbours, which is well above those. What we do know is that the use of ISPs has increased, and the use of our special schools have increased. Likewise, as Ross and I have been working on this, what we do know is that the alternative provision sector has increased their costs as well, and obviously the usage. So we've been working together as a team to look at how we can claw back over the next 3 years the 5.2 million, and you can see in Appendix A the DSG sort of plan. This is a template that we've used. It's a template that was for last year's actually, but we've started filling in the template. But what you will see as we work through the template is, whilst we can show we can recover the 5.2 million over the 3 years, what we can't do at this moment in time is actually stop the overspend. And I know I've spoken to several colleagues about this in my short and brief time here, but actually to be able to do that is quite a big undertaking. I think in terms of Warwickshire, I think we're a couple of years, if not several years behind the curve, and there's a big curve to climb and there's a big tanker to turn. But ultimately, to be able to get in a position where we are sustainable within this budget, or at least attempting to be sustainable in the budget, there are significant changes that are required. So basically what we're asking you today is to approve a DSG recovery plan, which in all respects shows that, you know, fundamentally we're not recovering and not balancing the books in terms of the spend against the DSG. So is there any questions anybody wants to ask, and to go into more detail on how we've come to these figures?
Alison, I think you've got a question, an overarching question.
Yes, hello Dwayne, nice to meet you in these extreme circumstances. Yes, it's very much an overarching one before we get into the details, and there's a bit more, there's a bit less than that. You've asked us, or this paper asks us to approve a DSG recovery plan. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, I think we had these conversations a few months ago, whether approve is the right word, because the councillor, I believe, approves. If you look at the actual plan, it says, does the schools forum agree?
Agree, sorry.
Yeah, and I was Googling a bit on the DFE website, and they were talking about, has the deficit recovery plan been presented to the schools forum? So I'm no lawyer, But I'm trying to work out what I'm actually being asked to do, because being presented with something is quite different to proving it. And then when you look at the actual recovery plan, on the second page, in the box at the top of the second page, it said in 2017-18 Schools Forum agreed a £2.5 million savings plan.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't think we did agree one. I think we had one presented to us, but the high needs budget is not on a budget that we can approve or not approve. It is a budget on which we must be consulted. And I know they sound a bit pedantic, and apologies, but it's quite important to see what are we actually doing here. Thanks.
Okay, and that's fine, absolutely, and I will go ahead and happy to amend the report and bring that up in the next meetings. But so I suppose the question is we're presenting a DSG recovery which the local authority or the council has put together for the DFE, which is a requirement of the Department for Education. So I will check for accuracy the sort of what has happened in previous years whilst I've not been here, and we will amend that accordingly.
I think it's fair to say, and Alison, to your point, and I agree entirely with you, we are a consultative body. So this, we are part of the consultation process. It would be good if Schools Forum can work with the local authority, and we can support the budget recovery plan and challenge it as well, and hold the local authority to account in the delivery of it. But we are a consultative body and we are not approving it. I would agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Martin, I think you have your hand up.
Yes. It's really a very broad-ranging strategic question, which is I've not got any quarrel with the particular ideas in the plan and so on, but realistically this is an area where demand has endlessly exceeded supply over years, and all the underlying factors suggest this will continue to be so. So I think there is a really big strategic question which perhaps really goes right the way to the department, but which the authority could, I'm sure to some extent has already done so, but the authority could endlessly lobby, because although I'm not quarrelling, I've read the document in detail and there's some very interesting ideas there, but I suppose I still think ultimately this might well be mission unachievable.
And I think, thank you, Martin, for that. I think actually what we are saying is, even with significant changes in the medium to long term, whether we can make this pot of money and part of the designated schools grant balance is questionable, because ultimately the demand, and in terms of the National Audit Report and other reviews that have gone on since the implementation of the SEND reforms in 2014, I don't think they ever predicted the costs and the demand would be as it was. I think they felt that bringing an education health and care plan would actually reduce this, and has had the complete opposite effect. What I do know, Martin, at the moment is it is not sustainable the way it is, and if we do nothing, the cumulative deficit will increase significantly over a short period of time. And I think if you look at the figures over the next 5 years, the option to do nothing isn't an option. So whilst we have certain programmes in place, I don't think that's enough to even begin to change what we need to change to have the impact we need to have, to at least show the DFE that we have a robust plan, and we are actually looking at this as a a significant problem and an issue. So I think there are things we can do. There are things we can do is sort of to tighten the purse a bit and to make it fair, make it equitable. Because, Martin, when I've looked at the results of the children and young people in Warwickshire that have special education needs and or disabilities, the outcomes are going backwards, and that's not a good position. So all the money we spend in, we're not improving outcomes for our children and young people. But I agree with you, yes, absolutely. I don't think it'll balance in a few years either.
Thank you, Dwayne. I'll allow Andy to come in just 1 second. I just wanted to pick up on a point that Martin has said, and I totally agree. There's a fundamental national issue with regards to high needs funding. However, I do not want to hide behind that
to not do anything. And I know Dwayne is very supportive of this, and Ian as well. We fundamentally have to change what we're doing in Warwickshire, because there are total inefficiencies within the system, within Warwickshire, that need addressed urgently and have been needed to be addressed for some time. So absolutely, there is a national picture, but we can't rest on our laurels, and we really need to move forward on this. So, you know, and I'm really positive about this plan. And, you know, a lot of work has gone into it. And, you know, to be fair, I feel it's overdue, but we're there now. So that's great. So that's from me. Andy, you wanted to come in.
Yes, and I shared some of this with you, Jane, yesterday when we did the pre-brief. But so it's quite a lot of debate in the council this week around the proposals and the report, and quite a lot of work gone into thinking about the strategy generally that we move forward with. And the corporate board, Monica, and the service directors are very supportive of us wrapping quite a strong team around the education area to try and support how we move this forward. So that isn't something that Warwickshire can pay for in terms of putting the right resource into working with the education service, yourselves as the forum, to strengthen the plan that's there as a base starting point. And there is a need to evolve that now into something that we can start to say, well, by throwing the right resource at it, can we accelerate things? Are the things that we can do that are perhaps in some instances a bit more unpalatable, but actually we might need to get closer to closing the gap. But I agree that actually that won't necessarily completely fix the gap, as Martin said. And there is an intention to see how we tie up with other authorities and other national associations to lobby government for the right level of funding. My concern at the moment is what the post-COVID impact is going to look like in terms of our ability to lobby. And I mentioned that yesterday. The amount of debt that central government has racked up and the way the revenues have gone in terms of tax returns means the money might not be there. And my worry is that social care will be in front of the queue with the profile that it's had. So there's no certainty that we'll get a bailout in terms of that national picture. So how we minimise that gap is quite important. The other two things we then need to do in parallel to try and ease that, and I know this was a bone of contention last year because the strength of the plans weren't there, and Schools Forum took a view on that, rightly so, is that there's still the question around the 0.5% disapplication and whether we can get that through this year or not, with some confidence that the right plans are in place to support that we're moving it back to a more balanced position. And the money that the council has set aside, I am trying to push for the fact that we could represent to the Secretary of State to get some of that used as bridging finance to offset some of the short-term gaps, on the view that we then will recover it as we go forward. So that sort of eases the pressure in the short term. So there's a mixed economy of things here, and appreciate the support in terms of working together that we need to do between us to get to the right answer. It's not just one thing that's going to get us there, but actually we've got to put the right resources around this to make it work, which we're trying to do, and find the right dedicated resource to free up to support the team to do that.
Great, thanks, Andy. Phil Johnson, I know that you have been sending a couple of messages. Do you want to speak?
Yes, I will, Chair. Thanks very much. I mean, I've actually spoken to one of my schools about this week, one which has got, a really high level of demand in this area. In September, we're going to have 31 EHCPs in place, which is probably a record for us. And some of the comments that are coming back from them are that, we do need to deal with some of these issues earlier than we're doing at the moment, before the children get into mainstream. I think that we haven't had, it's been reported that we haven't had much speech and language input into nurseries this year, so that we've got children coming to school with significant difficulties that need to be addressed. So I think the plan's good. But I think we need to recognise that, we need to do more early intervention, and there needs to be more liaison between mainstream and the specialist sector, so that maybe we can have some transfer between the sectors. It's not a case of, oh, well, this child is in this sector forever. Maybe there is more flexibility involved, so we may be able to look at reducing some of the costs that way.
Can I come in here, Phil? Hi. Actually, yes, and what you're saying is 100%. So if I explain to you what sits behind this plan, Ross and the team have been doing lots of work prior to my arrival One thing I've learned over the years is not about just recovering, it's about sustaining the system, and that is not here at the moment. We also have a SEND strategy that's been consulted with the community, young children, people and their families. So what we've got is improving outcomes for all children and young people across an area in less money and tighter pressures. So it's this kind of perfect storm. One thing I have noticed with Warwick is in the early years sector in particular, is that, you know, we don't have the plans that we should have in place. And when they are coming, they come in just before they arrive in September to go to school. So part of the early intervention is how we develop our local offer, and that is linking with social care, because if you listen to the sort of rhetoric from the Children and Families Act, it is around education, health and care to access early intervention. If we can change some of the behaviours and look at some of the service deliveries within the local authority, that should release some capacity to support children to go to school. Yeah, and therefore, rather than just stopping at 4, we should be able to transfer some of that skill set over. So actually the children will be, those that absolutely need a plan, come into school with a plan, with wraparound support, and those that we can build capacity with our colleagues in the school setting. Because what I've said to people is, when we actually give a plan, that child, if we're giving it a tour, will have 23 years of funding from the high needs block. And that is what we are committing to. So what we need to make sure is those that absolutely needs one, gets one, and those that we can keep at SEN support and work with colleges, that we have that sort of resource available to do so. So I'm totally hearing what you're saying, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions of people making comments. Mary-Ann Burrows, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, that would be fine.
What would you like to say?
I just really wanted to support, I can't remember who made the comment, that I agree, I feel more needs to be done at nursery level. However, the maintained and PVI sector are at breaking point with special needs. We get virtually no support, and the feel in the industry is that the special needs is pushed back till they get to school. We have to fight to get EHCPs. And there is no funding, there's no training, and there's very little specialist support. The specialist support has been decimated over the last few years. So we all want to put the support in place for the children going into school, but we have to have support ourselves in order to provide that. So absolutely, I'm sure Sarah would second that as well.
Absolutely, and I think for me what we need to make sure we're doing is building capacity within our settings, because ultimately, you know, I can come in and work with a child for a few hours tomorrow, but I'm going to leave, and the people that remain there with that child need to be upskilled, because children's needs are more complex. We're keeping children alive far longer than we used to be able to do so. So I think for me is, how do we capacity build in our settings whilst, you know, and I'm going by my previous authority, whereby I had half the population here. There's about 30 children a year that from the time they're born, they should have a plan in place, because we know their needs are so significant that they will always be under our care for the rest of their lives. The other children, we need to build that skill set. So rather than staff just working with settings to get a plan, we need to be working with settings to say, okay, how can we support you to do this? How can we upskill your team? How can we offer you training? Because the children will already come in with an educational health and care plan. And to that end, we won't be looking for the assess plan do review for this cohort of children. Yeah, we will know about these because our health colleagues will notify who they are.
It's a sustainable capacity and not the EHCPs, because chasing down EHCPs is a symptom of the overall problem. Get the capacity in early, and those children are supported early, and then they're less likely to escalate up the system later on. There'll always be a small targeted cohort that will need the protection and level of support through the HCP, but they're with very complex needs. And that's just one little lens on the system that we've got to move with confidence on.
Ian, I agree with you. There needs to be an understanding that that PVI settings especially aren't incentivised to take children with special needs because they end up paying for them themselves. And many settings do that willingly, but it has a massive impact on our bottom lines, which isn't covered by any other funding. So that, you know, so we sort of somehow need to build that into the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things is we're looking at, and that's what the modelling is. If you look at the recovery and sustainability, that's what we're doing, is factoring in a certain percentage of children at an earlier stage will have access to funding.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's about then, you know, there are conditions with that, because actually it has to be that we sort of buffer that while we're changing the culture over, if that makes sense. So we're going to see an increase initially, and overall we should see a decrease then. But yeah, absolutely, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So we have a comment from, and I'm sorry if I don't know who this is. Chair 3144 is your code name.
Hi Jane, it's Nick Wiley. That's my
Hi.
that's my,
In disguise.
my chair of governors email address. I think Andy's just partly addressed it. I'd make one brief comment. This feels like a bit of a step change in terms of where we've been before. I think, as you alluded to, I did balk a little bit in seeing the plan about this idea of a confrontational relationship between Schools Forum and the local authority. We are representatives of different schools and their interests. So if in representing those interests, we feel, well, actually it is best for the schools that they retain more of their funding and we don't transfer over, and we've held that position for a couple of years. It's unhelpful, I think, to talk about confrontational relationships between the school forum and the local authority. I think the work that's being done in the local authority is incredibly difficult, very challenging. There are people working very, very hard on this and have been for a number of years. I don't dispute that. I don't feel like I'm being confrontational. I'm representing the views of different schools. But yeah, I think my particular question then was about, well, so what? If we do not address, if we're sat here in 3 years' time and we've still got what is called an overspend, what is clearly an underfund, if we're still in that position in 3 years, what will happen? What will the DV do? What are the implications for us as a schools forum, for the local authority, or do we just sort of roll on for a number of years, accepting that we're always going to have a problem in this area because we just don't get enough money?
I mean, it's really difficult because what we've actually seen is 11 years worth more children in the system. And then what we have seen through austerity is access to service being limited. Yeah, we've seen everybody as they've tightened their belts. And therefore, what we have seen is the 80 is a ticket to funding. Yeah. When actually that was going against everything it was supposed to be. It was supposed to bring in together a holistic package for the child. What we also have, and I can't dress it up no other way in what is evidence, is that we have a lot of children that need a plan, and that is without a shadow of doubt. But we have some children whose families or professionals want a plan because it gives additional funding. And therefore, what the law does allow us to do is set the thresholds in which we say, as an authority, this is the level of need that will access a plan. But what we need to have sitting under there is access to services for those, so almost like a substitution in terms of providing support. Now, in terms of a not enough funding, I mean, I've had many meetings with the DFE over the years, and I was 152 out of 152 on the F40. Yeah, we were the lowest funded authority. And, as much as we've gone and said this is it, and we've lobbied and we've written through the F40 group, somebody had to be the lowest funded. So therefore, the way I see it is if we don't have the funding coming in, we can't keep on spending £8-9 million a year. Yeah. And again, we have to tighten our pockets. So there are things we can do. We can do quickly and we can pull back. There are other things that will take longer, and that's where my finance colleagues come in how we are going to bridge that gap. Because you are right, I don't think even at the end of 5 years, we will still have an overspend. I think the problem is a big problem.
Ian, do you want to come in?
And yet there's a difference that we can make every week, every month, every year. There are over 120 work streams we've been looking at on this change programme. Each of those needs to have a detailed plan for delivery and the capacity to deliver on. Some of the work lines, work streams have got financial modelling attached to them. Others don't at the moment. And that's absolutely right as well, because for DFE, Ofsted and for ourselves, there is a credibility and a heart and a clarity that comes from putting figures down that we are clear about and have confidence in, and continuing doing the development work until we are confident in those where we do not have figures at the moment. Andy very helpfully earlier on talked about a wraparound capacity team for a major change programme like this. This is going to be one of the most major and significant change programmes for schools and for the local authority in the time ahead. There are assurances on that. I have assurances that there is ownership of that. And yet, when you start a change programme like this, it's important that there is a clarity and an understanding of what is in that change programme and what it will feel like, and what engagement, training, development and resources underpin that programme to give people confidence in it and its delivery. And in this early stage, part of that capacity has to be around communications and engagement. You know, we have got standing groups of head teachers and SENCOs that are contributing to the SEND strategy. But for this to be a programme that moves forward with confidence, we need to make sure that there is communication and engagement with governors, with head teachers, with SENCOs, with business managers, and that's just in the school sector, our internal teams, our counsellors, our health colleagues, our social care colleagues, all of those kind of sectors as well. So in this next phase, expect there to be a dedicated capacity and time put into Teams type events, communication materials, the chance for people to ask what if questions, as well as getting information around the complexity of a programme like this. It's a big programme.
Thanks, Ian. Neil, did you want to say something? You've got your hand raised. And you're on mute.
Sorry, no, I didn't realise I had my hand raised. I apologise.
It's all right, don't worry. I think it's M. Bone. I think it's Matt, isn't it? Were you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to really probably reiterate the things that I keep saying quite a lot over the last few years. And it's, you know, I come from an SEM background and I'm in mainstream now, and I say that in all the different working groups that I'm in. We're missing a trick still here, and the trick is the link between special schools and mainstream schools. I've seen it work so well, and actually the financial implications are minimum for that. There's a little bit of investment for it to work, but the support that those special schools can give to mainstream schools, and also help yourselves in working out the level of EHCP, who meets the criteria, and even the transition to the right school at the right time, is urgent, and that will have a positive financial implication on working with this deficit.
When we talk about capacity, one element of that is training development across the wider schools workforce, but absolutely a key part of that that's so successful in so many places is where special schools are providing outreach services.
Yeah. And at the moment, with us looking at developing a number of special needs schools at this point, it's the perfect time to build that into this new way of working for special needs schools and link mainstreams in from a very, very early on.
Absolutely, and you know, certainly, so I'm sitting on a few of the sort of boards in terms of our new schools, and one of the things for me is, you know, we need to build in a revolving door and ownership of our children. You know, it was quite eye-watering when I joined here to find out how many children are not in schools, in our Warwickshire schools. And ultimately, and I know I've sort of said to Jane in other conversations, what's happened because supply for our alternative provision is exceeding demand, hence the costs are going up. So what we've got are AP providers that are unregistered, who are actually costing us as much now as some independent, where you would put really high needs children. So I think for me is looking at the skill set within the workforce. It's about building in, you know, within our contracts and service level agreements, outreach program, because that is cost effective. That is the best, you know, we can do. But I think moreover, it's about keeping our children in schools. Yeah, and I think it's looking at our thresholds and how we work with our colleagues to say, actually, what can we do to support you to keep this child? What can we do to support you to? But what's happening at the moment is we're just taking children out to school to do that support outside of the classroom. What I did say today as I chaired the high needs panel is that we're going to have thousands of children that are going to have anxiety by September because they've been out to school for so long. So, you know, maybe this will be a learning curve for all of us, but actually, you know, we couldn't put every one of them in a mainstream special school. So it is understanding what our local offer is and what we can offer for our children, young people and their families, absolutely.
Thanks, Dwayne. Becky, I think you've had your hand raised for a while. Sorry.
That's okay. Having been on the party, fantastic work. Really appreciate everything that you've been doing. The comment I was going to raise was, I think Andy mentioned about using the 0.5% that school forum had said no to at the last meeting. I thought we were using some of that for the sparsity. So I can't use it twice to pay for this and do sparsity.
No, that's for next. No, it's for next year. And we're not even talking about it as yet, Becky. Yeah, it's because we've got the surplus for this year in our growth fund. But what we do need to do is potentially look at the disapplication again next year. It might come up next year. So it would be next year.
Yeah. So Becky, we would
have the sustainability of the sparsity.
I can't hear you. Sorry, Becky, I'm struggling to hear you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely respected as decision from Schools Forum and local authorities supportive of it. We've just got to chase down ESFA to endorse it.
Yes, no, what I'm meaning is it a one-off or would we be doing it every year?
Oh no, the whole point with that was finally we could converge with the national funding formula. That's for the future, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I know that Andy's got a comment to make, but I did want to kind of, because I've been able to have some conversations, certainly with Dwayne being part of the working group for high needs. And Dwayne, you've obviously got quite a lot of experience from your previous role. And Andy's also mentioned he has too. So perhaps just, an overview of your experience, both of you, to enable Schools Forum to get a bit of comfort that you kind of know what you're doing and you've done it before.
Yeah. So I'm by training, my degree's in economics. So I got a degree in economics. I worked in business for the first part of my life. I worked in marketing. When you see some of the settings I've set up over the years and how I market, so I think I've got that skill set. And then I left that profession to go into teaching, and I became a maths teacher. So I taught maths. I worked in one of the Beacon schools years ago, teaching A-level economics and A-level mathematics. Got a bit bored because the children could learn without me, actually. So I decided to go and teach children with special needs. So did that for a few years, and then I left to start my family, of which I had 5 children. My children, 3 were born with significant chromosomal disorders. So they have quite rare syndromes. Always taught in special needs, always set up projects, always change management, went into a school where it was in special measures, and was able to turn the special needs provision around. So I've done school improvement with special needs. And then I was approached by authority about 5 years ago. Actually, everybody, I wasn't looking for the job. They approached me and said, could you come and join us? I was going for a headship interview on the Monday, and on the Friday they said, please come. And I thought I was going, truth is, put my feet up for the rest of my career. So I had 10 years left, and anyway, I worked there. But actually, we started on the secondary forms. You're happy for you to look at the data because in 2015, in January, when I started, our percentage increase in plans in that year was 20%. Following year, I brought it down to 14, then 10. This year, my increase in percentage of plans was 2%, as opposed to 16% here. Okay. That was hard going because what we did is set a threshold. We said, this is the type of child we need. This is what we'll give. We will support you well, but you need to just take this type of child. In saying that, all my children have gone to the mainstream schools. They taught in the Welsh-speaking schools. Nobody has ever turned any of my children away because they've had special educational needs or disabilities. So I'm very passionate around inclusion. I think every child has the right to go to the local school, and we must try everything we can to accommodate that. So yeah, so that's my background, and yeah, so just nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne, for sharing that, because it does give us that kind of context. And Andy, you've also got some background in this as well, which is great.
Yeah, I'm not from a practitioner point of view like Dwayne, so Dwayne's the hardcore practitioner side of it. My experience is I used to be a senior leader in the Transformation Support Unit in Staffordshire County Council for the last 8 years. And my team specialised in service redesign. And I had a team of people that were working with the SEND service for 3 or 4 years in Staffordshire. And as I said in the chat, one of the hardest things we found wasn't actually the schools or the partner engagement. We actually had some really good district working and district hubs that were set up. Actually, it was the actual internal county council services that were stuck in the past, and it was a real difficulty trying to get the cultural shift and the mindset shift to a different place for those services. And I think we've got a similar challenge. I don't know the services well enough, but I think we've got a similar challenge from conversations in Warwickshire. So it's, yeah, my experience is more from the transformational support side of it, hence trying to work with Dwayne to put the right capacity around the professionals so that they can make this happen and move it forward. So I think the combination of the two of us hopefully will move it forward in the right way. But as other people have said, it's critical that we work with you. It's got to be a partnership in terms of how we solve this, because actually we can't do it without your engagement and the right working arrangements with yourselves as schools, and coming up with the right solutions with you as well.
That's great, thank you. Nikki Burton, I think you've got a question.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to add in, for school forum members, I've been on the DSG recovery panel, and I just wanted to share some of the points raised. Mary, your point about early intervention, it has been covered absolutely thoroughly. I think that's been a massive factor with Dwayne and Ross and Ian, really going back to those starting points of our youngest children and how we can support through portage, wider professionals. Matt, your point on the special and the mainstream, again, that has been covered thoroughly in the plan. I think for you, Dwayne, you've added so much into that, and I think that's your core, how we have to really bridge those relationships between all of our family of schools. From Ian's perspective, I think, Ian, what you've said about the family of schools and how we now share this new culture and this new way of working, we've got to get that trust in our managers. You know, we've got to really get that on board and put the resource in to do that. And I think from Andy, from your perspective of that partnership, if we've got to work together as School Forum and the LA together. And I think from being on that panel, I really feel I can bring back to School Forum that all those points have been raised in great detail and with great thought. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Nikki, because I think those meetings have been extremely useful and has provided me with a lot of encouragement that we are moving forward in the right direction. And just to expand on that, I mean, I think there's 4 of us on that working panel at the moment, and I will offer it up to anybody else within Schools Forum who would like to participate. We had a meeting earlier today. There is a lot of work to be done. This is just the start of a very long journey. So, can I suggest, you don't have to say now, but if you would like to get involved in the working group representing the Schools Forum, representing your schools that you represent, I've used represent quite a lot there, but yeah, please let perhaps Neil know, if you could message him to let him know if you're interested in getting involved in the High Needs Working Group, because I think we've got a lot to add. and we can work in partnership and really make a difference. Any other questions for the team before? I don't think it's a vote, because we're not approving this as we've clarified. I think it's just an acceptance of this proposal that I think we've had a good debate around it, and there's a lot of challenging work to do going forward. Martin, you want to raise
Well, it's a general point, and I'm sure people appreciate it, but in a primary school in particular, the depth and breadth of the management team is very thin in comparison to set schools, and therefore, though obviously one wholly accepts the idea of having as many as possible in mainstream, and the principle of the ideal is splendid, but I think it will continue to be pretty difficult to do so with stretched management teams, and therefore one of the things that needs to be thought about is how those teams can be supported in carrying forward the vision.
Absolutely. And if we start of the premise of local first, then that's a good place to start. And I think for me, Martin, it's about when I look at a school, and when I was in the school, it was my school and it was my children in that school. I've got thousands of children across Warwick, so when you're looking at your school, you can multiply that by 200 and odd more schools. And I think for me, it is about providing support. What I have said to Jane, and while I was applying for this post and while I was looking at all the data, what I can say is the schools in terms of the high needs block, the maintained schools, I think we can improve on some of the funding. I think we need to be able to support you to take the children, but we can only do that if we accept to take the children. So, because otherwise I'm spending £100,000 for a child to go into an independent school, because unfortunately the law is quite explicit in terms of the statutory responsibility for us to educate.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. So I think instead of asking for a kind of a vote to approve, I think if we could indicate our support for the DSG recovery plan, I think that would be useful. So within your comments, if you could do that, if you could indicate your support or otherwise for the DSG recovery plan and the plan that's been presented, that'd be great.
Lost the chat facility, but never mind, I agree.
Okay, thank you, Martin. So if Neil can record that, I think Rebecca said she's supported with her hand up. Sybil, you've got indicating support. Great. Super. I think we've got a lot of positive reactions, which is great. And as I say, if anybody else wants to get involved in the working party, please do let Neil know. I think Nick has just put a comment, still keen to see more measurable success criteria, which we can review at future meetings, but I think that's a very good point.
Can I just add to that, Jane, because this programme we will be monitoring at every level. Right. So happy to share that.
Super. And obviously, I think we talked about at the pre-meet that this would be a standing agenda item. So in the October meeting, we will, it will appear on the agenda in the future meetings. If the DSG recovery plan format changes, or if the deadline for submission changes or anything fundamental changes from the Department for Education, we may have to call an extraordinary meeting of Schools Forum. Again, not to approve it, but just to go through any significant changes, just to make you aware, because it's not within our gift to say what's going to happen from the Department for Education. But we would only call the meeting if we felt it absolutely necessary. Okay, thank you very much, Dwayne, for your input in that, and for Andy as well, and Ian. I think that's been super. Ian, I think it's over to you for your update.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Normally, as you know, I'd be giving a fair amount of update in terms of our work on SEND change, and inclusion over this last year. I think the only thing I want to say on it this afternoon, given it's been the substantive and very welcome as a substantive discussion item this afternoon, is to say thank you to you, Chair, and thank you to colleagues who've contributed to the recovery plan task and finish group. And yes, any additional volunteers to join that group and come with us on the journey as we start to mobilise the Send Change programme for delivery. You'd be very welcome to be part of the ongoing discussions through that group. And then that's a way in which you can influence what those initial communications and engagement sessions look like for different areas of the county. Okay, so what do you think has been dominating our time over the last 12 weeks? Well, it's no great surprise. 13 weeks ago, we couldn't have anticipated what the following 12 weeks would look like. Much of our time and our endeavour has been focused on the initial emergency response on coronavirus and gradually changing the focus over to reset and recovery. It really has felt like a very close family of schools through these last 12 weeks. There are a number of things that have served us well along the way. One thing is absolutely clear: we did not want any head teacher to be working through the situation in isolation. And so from the first week, we have had twice weekly meetings with head teacher representatives and sector representatives from early years all the way through to local college provision. So very broad representation of the education community. And those standing meetings have been influencing what we've been putting our time and effort into. Every day we have had a bulletin to try and synthesize the flow of guidance and expectations from central government, but also Public Health England and indeed the professional associations. We've also had weekly meetings with the DFE and with Ofsted in order to be able to pass through key messages and to try and influence what the guidance subsequently contains in terms of reset and recovery. We also meet on a weekly basis with all of the trade unions. Originally, it was the teaching trade unions, the professional leadership unions, and the frontline teaching unions. But along the way, we've been able to integrate Unison, Unite and GMB as support staff unions as well. If we come to look at the last 3 weeks, it won't surprise you that almost any working hour that we could lay our hands on has been around working with primary colleagues in the development of a risk assessment framework for moving towards wider opening than was the position when schools were open for vulnerable children and the children of critical workers. And for the majority of primary schools, they have made the progression to the next steps on wider opening this week, with a minority moving to those next steps when they feel safe to do so next week, and with just a few in the following week. The council position, with the majority of councils across the country, is to support and encourage head teachers in their risk assessments and for them to have the confidence to know their community well enough to be able to discern the pace and the pattern of provision within the guidance framework and the dates at which wider opening could occur. I'm so grateful for all of the time that school leaders have put into working with us, because on top of the practical planning on risk assessments and plans for wider opening, they have participated in a number of task and finish groups on everything from tailored support for the vulnerable, what well-being support should look like on the return to school for learners, but also for school leaders and the wider school workforce. And there's so much coming through as well around what advice and guidance and practice should be shared in relation to curriculum development going forward and pedagogy too. As a reference earlier in the meeting to funding, very early into the 12 weeks, the government issued a paper with indicative allocations, maximum claim totals for schools, 25,000 for schools with 250 pupils or less, moving up to over 75,000 for over 1,000 pupils, and 50,000 as a limit for special schools and alternative provision. There are a number of areas in which the government discerns that there is eligible expenditure to make a claim against, and the government is quite explicitly not expecting schools to draw on existing reserves to meet these coronavirus-related costs. But nor are they expecting there to be claims if schools are planning to add to reserves in the 2021 financial year. One of the key messages, well, one of many messages that's been coming through from the twice weekly school leaders meeting is that there's been no change to that financial claims paper since it was published in early weeks, whilst on many other themes there has been a flurry of guidance refresh and new guidance issued over recent weeks. So there's a strong request that that particular guidance note is revisited, and we have duly and repeatedly passed that through the DFE line and the Ofsted line for consideration by central government. Well, if only it had been as simple a journey so far as I've managed to cover in the last 5 minutes. It has been an amazing journey so far, which I'm so grateful for colleagues across the school workforce for everything they have done to adapt to distance learning and to make provision for our most vulnerable and the children of key workers. Along the way, unlike some of the national coverage, staying open and staying open through the Easter holiday and through half term as well. And I'm conscious of what pressure that has left on staff colleagues, so we are working hard on representations to the DFE to make sure that the summer holiday is safeguarded, and the opportunity for our colleagues across the workforce to recover and recharge and reset for the autumn that there is over the summer holiday period. Okay, that's what we're doing on COVID, and it has dominated the last weeks, although at times it has been quite a blessing to be able to look at some of the business as usual and some of the new business as usual. Within that, we were due this summer to be publishing a refresh to our education strategy after the review work that so many colleagues participated in during the autumn. We've taken the opportunity of COVID to make that refresh for September because there are elements within that strategy refresh which the learning from COVID can influence. So whilst there were some obvious ones like the Send Change programme to be at the fore on the education strategy, there are also a range of other parts of the strategy that will be refreshed, and it will not surprise you after these weeks of COVID-19 that will include a refresh to our e-learning and digital learning strategy, and it will also include a refresh in relation to narrowing the gap, or in the current circumstance making sure that gap doesn't get wider for our most vulnerable children and young people, and part of that being the wellbeing offer and the literacy and cultural literacy offers. So the education refresh strategy will be ready to go for September, and alongside that, of course, all of the work that we've covered earlier in this meeting in relation to the major SEND change programme. So that's a quick ADs update. Of course, you have two ADs here now for this and future schools forum meetings. Andy is very welcome, and he'll be able to do updates as well, I'm sure, in future meetings too. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ian. And Matt, you've got a question?
Yeah, could I just check something that was just mentioned then, really, just for both myself as a head teacher, but also my head teacher colleagues. A lot of the, and it's slightly skewing what school forum is about, but you've just mentioned it, so I'm just going to pick up on it if I can. All the way through this, we've been left as schools to do the best we can for e-learning, be as creative as we can, tap into whatever resources. There is being, for some schools, more of a push to develop a more comprehensive system, which is going to take a lot of our time, potentially money, etc. Am I getting a sense there that maybe the local authority are looking at helping to support us with something such as that? Or do we need to be 100% going down that road? Or if something's going to come our way, should we hold the brakes there and see what comes our way before we put too much time and effort into it on top of everything else?
No, you should never put the brakes on. You know me well enough not to be saying put brakes on. No, all the way through this, very grateful for the Task and Finish group of head teachers, and indeed actually the adjustments that Ofsted have made, because we were very fortunate to be able to recruit Jane Spilsbury. For those with long memories, she was Hayley Good's predecessor in the post that Hayley's held until tomorrow. But prior to the work with Warwickshire and her work with Ofsted, she had for 10 years worked with Bector on digital learning and has retained a passion for digital learning ever since. So she's been working very closely, not only with the in-house digital learning team, but also with the Task and Finish group of head teachers to refresh what the offer should look like going forwards. So I think a good thing for you would be for us to make them contact you and vice versa. And see how we can help out.
That'd be good. As I say, I'm just aware now that we've had to put all our efforts at the moment to get to the point of reopening as a primary school. The next thing on the agenda, literally on the horizon right now, is how can we develop the home learning using digital technology. So if there is anything out there, that could be communicated to teachers, that would make our life a lot easier right now.
Yeah, along the way, there's been lots of practical advice and guidance issued. And Emma Jelfs has been really helpful on procurement side, as well as on the kind of curriculum and pedagogy work that Jane's been leading on. So yeah, we'll make sure you've got access to that and visibility on that.
Right, thank you very much.
Ian, just following up on that point, is it focused predominantly at primary schools on online learning, or is it also expanded to secondaries as well?
Oh, no. All of the advice and guidance along the way has been in the daily bulletins. So it is primary and secondary and special. But there's the adjustments we've made very rapidly. But it's fascinating. Over these weeks, very rapidly people mobilised and made adjustments for distance learning and e-learning, some more successfully than others, with a lot of shared practice along the way. But I think actually, as part of the recovery side of things, there is learning, and there's changes in terms of digital learning that have happened very rapidly that probably would have taken many years if there wasn't that pressing need that we experienced over this last 12 weeks. So I know there's been so much tragedy and so much psychological challenge in adapting so rapidly with COVID-19, but there are some things that positively will come out of this as well. And we'll have to try and hold on to those and make the most of them. And that's partly around where there's been more successful adaptation, making sure that's more successfully shared around the system.
Matt, you've got another question?
So I just wanted to make one final point, then I'll disappear off your screens. I just want to pick up on what you've just said there, Ian, about how quickly schools have had to adapt because of the virus to the online learning. What I'd say is, going back to SEN, look at how long this has taken us to get to a position with SEN. It just goes to show, if we need to do it, we can do it, and we can do it quickly, and this has proved it.
Yeah, so spot on, Chair. And actually, one of the things that is a big theme in the twice-weekly meetings with head teachers, though, as well, there was an immediate response to an emergency situation. People were phenomenal in adapting really, really quickly. Everybody had down moments and challenge moments and uncertainty moments, but the response was phenomenal. But the coronavirus situation isn't going to go away quickly. So it is so important that people take time out as well and get time out as well to be re-energized, to reflect.
Let's make sure we get our summer holidays, Ian, then.
We're fighting for it.
Yeah. Well, we too as well.
No summer schools. Anyway, we won't get onto that. Sorry, we're digressing. Has anyone got any other questions for Ian? Okay, and nothing is coming up, Ian, but thank you very much for that update. That's been very, very useful. I think the only thing left on the agenda is Chair's business. The only thing I was going to mention was I'd had something from the DFE saying that Schools Forum legislation has been amended to enable kind of online meetings to take place. Neil's looking a bit puzzled. I probably didn't share it with him. And that Schools Forum still do have a legal obligation to meet 4 times a year, but we have achieved that because we had an extra meeting despite one being cancelled. But yeah, so we are able to do what we've just done. I thought I maybe should have said that right at the start of the meeting. But anyway, that's the only thing from me. I think that's the end of the meeting. So I just wish you all the best in the next half term. And I reiterate what Ian said, do try and take a break over the summer, because I think everybody has been working incredibly hard over, throughout a very challenging and unique set of circumstances. So take care of yourselves, everybody. And who knows where we will meet in October.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jane.
Nice to meet you,
everybody. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.